A deafening silence fell over the crowded dining room of Evergreen, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Every eye fixed on him, the simple waiter who dared to accept her challenge. His weathered hands hovered over the strings of a vintage Gibson guitar, a family heirloom worth more in memories than money. Across the room, Victoria Sterling, tech mogul and self-proclaimed queen of Silicon Valley, wore a smile that dripped with cruel anticipation. She had meant to break him, to turn him into another amusing anecdote for her next dinner party. Instead, she was about to witness something that would haunt her for years to come. "Show us what you've got, waiter boy," she called out, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone used to watching others stumble for her entertainment. "Or is that guitar just for show?" Marcus Chen's fingers trembled slightly, but his eyes held a fire that made even Victoria's closest associates shift uncomfortably in their seats. What happened next would not only silence every mocking laugh in that room, it would change lives forever. But to understand the true weight of this moment, we need to go back to where it all began. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, because this story of triumph over humiliation is one you won't want to miss. It was a crisp autumn evening in New York City, and the renowned Evergreen restaurant hummed with the gentle cacophony of fine dining. Crystal glasses clinked delicately, silver cutlery whispered against bone china, and the soft murmur of sophisticated conversation filled the air. Among this carefully orchestrated symphony of luxury, Marcus Chun moved with practiced grace, his steps silent against the polished hardwood floors. At 32, Marcus carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his station. His pressed black uniform and polished shoes might have marked him as just another server. But there was something in his bearing, a certain elegance in his movements, a depth in his dark eyes, that hinted at layers beneath the surface. Few knew that beneath those perfectly pressed sleeves lay the calloused fingers of a musician, each hardened groove a testament to thousands of hours spent dancing across guitar strings. The story of how Marcus came to be here, serving Manhattan's elite instead of performing on the stages he once dreamed of, was one of sacrifice and responsibility. Born to immigrant parents in San Francisco's bustling Chinatown, Marcus had grown up watching his father work 18-hour days in their small electronics repair shop, while his mother's fingers grew arthritic from endless hours of alterations work. Their sacrifice had given him an education, but when his father's stroke left the family teetering on the edge of financial ruin, Marcus set aside his music scholarship to help shoulder the burden of medical bills and family obligations. His prized possession, a 1969 Gibson J45 acoustic guitar, was all that remained of his former dreams. It had belonged to his first music teacher, Mr. Harrison, an aging blues musician who had recognized something special in the young boy who would press his face against the music shop window every day after school. When Mr. Harrison passed away 5 years ago, he had left Marcus the guitar, along with a note that read, "Music isn't just what we play, son. It's who we are. Never let anyone take that from you." That guitar now hung in Marcus's small apartment in Queens, its well-worn surface telling stories of late-night practice sessions and the handful of gigs he still managed to play at small coffee shops when his schedule allowed. But bills didn't pay themselves, and Evergreen's generous tips helped keep his father's prescriptions filled and his younger sister in college. Tonight, however, was different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that seemed to grow with each passing moment. Victoria Sterling's arrival had been announced by the distinctive click of Louboutin heels and the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The way other diners sat up straighter, the way conversations hushed then erupted into excited whispers. Victoria Sterling was Silicon Valley royalty, having built her tech empire from the ground up. Her app, Social Sphere, had revolutionized social media, making her one of the youngest billionaires in the country. But with success came a reputation for ruthlessness that extended beyond the boardroom. She was known for her sharp tongue and sharper wit, taking particular pleasure in what she called character-building moments, public displays of dominance that reminded others of their place in her world. Marcus had served countless wealthy patrons before, but something about Victoria's presence made his skin prickle with unease. As he approached her table with the wine list, he couldn't have known that this evening would become one of those defining moments in life, the kind that separates everything into before and after. The thread of fate was already unraveling, leading toward a confrontation that would shake the foundations of both their worlds. Victoria Sterling was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful melodies come from the most unexpected places, and Marcus Chun would discover that some dreams refuse to stay buried, no matter how deeply we try to hide them. Victoria Sterling's reputation preceded her like a sharp winter wind. Her table, positioned in the heart of Evergreen's main dining room, had become a stage for her particular brand of entertainment. The wine she requested, a rare 1982 Bordeaux, wasn't just a drink choice. It was a power play, a casual display of wealth that made even the restaurant's affluent regulars glance at their own glasses with sudden self-consciousness. Marcus approached her table with the precision of someone who had learned to navigate treacherous waters. The wine bottle trembled ever so slightly in his hands, not from fear, but from the familiar ache of early morning practice sessions. His fingers had been dancing across guitar strings since dawn, finding solace in music before another long shift began. "Tell me," Victoria's voice cut through the ambient noise like a steel blade through silk, "do you enjoy serving others?" Her companions, a mix of tech executives and venture capitalists, shifted in anticipation. They'd seen this performance before. "It's an honor to serve at Evergreen," Marcus replied, his voice steady, measured. Years of performing at small venues had taught him how to maintain composure under scrutiny. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table's pristine white cloth. "An honor," she repeated, her tone dripping with mock consideration. "How fascinating. I always wonder about people who settle for less than they could be." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Around them, other diners pretended not to listen, but their posed conversations couldn't mask their interest. Victoria Sterling's public displays of power were becoming as legendary as her business acumen. "I noticed something interesting," she continued, her eyes fixed on Marcus with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. "That guitar callus on your left hand. Rather distinctive for someone who claims serving is their calling." Marcus's hand twitched involuntarily. Those calluses were badges of honor, earned through countless hours of practice, of pushing through bleeding fingers and aching wrists. They were the physical manifestation of dreams he'd had to set aside but never abandoned. "You play?" Victoria's question wasn't really a question. It was bait carefully laid. "I do," Marcus answered simply, remembering Mr. Harrison's words about owning who you are. Victoria's smile widened, revealing perfect teeth that seemed to gleam under the restaurant's crystal chandeliers. "How wonderful! We simply must have a demonstration. After all, Evergreen prides itself on hiring people of diverse talents." Her companions chuckled on cue, the sound as hollow as their forced smiles. One of them, a young venture capitalist who still carried the awkward energy of someone new to power, actually looked uncomfortable. "I'm afraid I'm on duty," Marcus began, but Victoria was already waving over the restaurant manager, Mr. Thompson. "James, darling," she called out, her voice honey-sweet but laced with steel. "Your waiter here is apparently quite the musician. Surely we can arrange a little entertainment." Mr. Thompson, a man who had built his career on navigating the whims of the wealthy, hesitated. His eyes met Marcus's, carrying an unspoken apology. "Miss Sterling, while we appreciate your interest in our staff's talents—" "Oh, come now," Victoria interrupted, her tone sharpening. "Surely you're not going to deny your most valuable patron a simple request? I'll even make it worth everyone's while." She reached into her designer handbag, pulling out a stack of $100 bills with casual disregard. $1,000 for one song. Unless, of course, our friend here isn't as talented as he claims. The room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him, each gaze carrying its own mixture of pity, curiosity, and anticipation. In that moment, he thought of his father, still struggling to form words after his stroke, but whose eyes still lit up at the sound of his son's guitar. He thought of Mr. Harrison, who had believed in him enough to leave him his most prized possession. He thought of all the nights he'd spent practicing in his tiny apartment, keeping his dreams alive in the spaces between responsibilities. "If you insist," Marcus said quietly, "I'll need my guitar." Victoria's eyebrows arched in surprise. "You actually have one here? How presumptuous." Her laugh was sharp, designed to cut. "By all means, fetch your instrument. Let's see what kind of talent lurks behind that serving tray." Marcus nodded to Mr. Thompson, who seemed relieved to have a reason to step away from the tension. "I'll have someone cover your section," the manager murmured as Marcus passed him. The walk to the employee locker room felt like crossing a vast desert. Marcus could feel Victoria Sterling's eyes boring into his back, could hear the murmur of conversations shifting to speculation about what was about to unfold. His 1969 Gibson J45 waited in its worn case, a faithful companion that had seen him through his highest highs and lowest lows. As he unzipped the case, his fingers brushed against Mr. Harrison's note, now creased and worn from countless readings. "Music isn't just what we play, son. It's who we are." The words seemed to pulse with new meaning. Before you continue this journey with us, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss what happens next in this extraordinary tale of courage and redemption. When Marcus returned to the dining room, his guitar cradled in his arms like a shield, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual dinner service hum had been replaced by an expectant hush. Victoria Sterling sat back in her chair, a queen preparing to be entertained, or more likely, preparing to witness another's humiliation for her amusement. "Well," she said, gesturing expansively, "the stage is yours, waiter. Impress me." Marcus took his position near the restaurant's grand fireplace, its warm light casting dancing shadows across the worn wood of his Gibson. The guitar felt alive in his hands, humming with potential energy. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and in that moment, something shifted inside him. What happened next would change everything, not just for Marcus and Victoria, but for everyone who witnessed it. But that story, that extraordinary moment of triumph and transformation, deserves its own telling. As Marcus positioned his fingers on the fretboard of his Gibson J45, time seemed to slow. The gentle glow of Evergreen's chandeliers caught the guitar's worn surface, highlighting every scratch and dent, each one a chapter in his story. Victoria Sterling's perfectly painted lips curved into a smirk, ready to witness what she assumed would be another triumph of wealth over worth. But Marcus wasn't thinking about Victoria anymore. His mind drifted to the small apartment in Chinatown where his father now sat in his favorite armchair, probably listening to the old vinyl records they'd collected together over the years. He thought about Mr. Harrison, who had seen something in a young boy peering through a dusty shop window. He thought about every late night spent practicing until his fingers bled, every dream deferred but never abandoned. Without announcement or preamble, Marcus began to play. The first notes of Hallelujah filled the air, but this was no simple cover. His fingers wove the melody into something entirely new, a tapestry of sound that blended Leonard Cohen's masterpiece with classical Chinese scales and hints of blues that Mr. Harrison had taught him years ago. The effect was haunting, powerful, impossible to ignore. Then Marcus began to sing. His voice, rich and deep with emotion, carried years of untold stories. He sang of broken dreams and unspoken sacrifices, of dignity in the face of derision, of love that transcends circumstance. The Mandarin verses flowed seamlessly into English ones, creating a musical journey that needed no translation to be understood. The transformation in the room was palpable. Wine glasses stopped midway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the kitchen staff, drawn by the music, peered through the service doors. Victoria's smirk had vanished, replaced by something that looked remarkably like uncertainty. As Marcus's fingers danced across the strings, each note seemed to strip away the careful facades that Evergreen's patrons wore like armor. A wealthy investor near the window dabbed at his eyes, perhaps remembering his own abandoned dreams. An elegant woman in pearls reached for her husband's hand, squeezing it as if the music had reminded her of something long forgotten. The song built to its crescendo, Marcus's voice soaring with a power that seemed to make the crystal chandeliers vibrate in sympathy. In that moment, he wasn't a waiter performing for tips. He was an artist sharing his soul, and everyone in that room knew it. When the final note faded into silence, no one moved. No one spoke. The quiet was absolute, holy, a moment suspended between breaths. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, a single person began to clap. The sound was quickly joined by another, then another, until the entire restaurant erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, their faces showing the kind of genuine emotion rarely seen in such an establishment. Victoria Sterling remained seated, her hands still resting on the table. The carefully constructed mask she wore had cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. Her companions shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to applaud or follow their leader's silence. Victoria started, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words, perhaps for the first time in her life. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. Marcus stood quietly, his guitar cradled in his arms. He didn't bow or acknowledge the applause. He simply waited, his eyes meeting Victoria's with neither triumph nor accusation, just quiet dignity. Victoria tried again, her voice barely audible above the continuing applause. "I've never heard anything quite like it." Before she could continue, an older gentleman approached their table. His expensive suit and commanding presence marked him as someone accustomed to authority, but there was a gentleness in his manner as he addressed Marcus. "Young man," he said, extending a business card, "I'm David Rothschild from Harmony Records. We need to talk." Marcus took the card reflexively, still processing everything that had happened. Mr. Thompson appeared at his side, beaming with a pride that seemed almost paternal. "Take your break now, Marcus," he said softly. "I think you've earned it." As Marcus made his way through the dining room, people reached out to touch his arm, to offer congratulations, to share how moved they were. A young girl, probably no more than 8, tugged at his sleeve. "Can you teach me to play like that?" she asked, her eyes shining with wonder. Her mother, dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month, didn't pull her away as she might have done earlier that evening. Instead, she smiled warmly, waiting for his response. "Music is a gift," Marcus told the girl, thinking of Mr. Harrison. "It's not about playing like someone else. It's about finding your own voice." If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect moment to join us for more stories that remind us of the extraordinary power of human spirit and authenticity. The aftermath of that evening rippled out in unexpected ways. Victoria Sterling, humbled by the experience, established a foundation providing musical education to underprivileged children. She never again used her wealth to humiliate others, having learned that true power lies not in the ability to tear down, but in the courage to lift up. The meeting with David Rothschild led to a recording contract, but Marcus insisted on terms that allowed him to continue working at Evergreen part-time. The restaurant had become more than a workplace. It was where his life had changed, where he'd finally embraced his true self. His first album, titled Serving Grace, debuted 6 months later. The cover showed his cherished Gibson J45 resting against an elegant dining room chair. The album notes included a dedication to Mr. Harrison and to his father, whose proud tears at the recording studio had said more than words ever could. Marcus used his first royalty check to pay off his father's medical bills. The second helped launch his sister's tech startup. But more importantly, his story became a symbol of hope for others who balanced dreams with duties, who carried music in their hearts while their hands did other work. Evergreen changed too. Every Friday night became an open mic event where staff members were encouraged to share their talents. The wealthy patrons who came to dine found themselves transformed into something more than customers. They became witnesses to the extraordinary magic that happens when people are free to be their authentic selves. Victoria Sterling became a regular at these Friday night performances. She always sat quietly in the back, applauding genuinely for each brave soul who took the stage. Sometimes, people who knew her story would notice tears in her eyes during particularly moving performances. Years later, when asked about that night, Marcus would always say the same thing. Music isn't just what we play, it's who we are. Sometimes it takes someone trying to break you to realize just how unbreakable you really are. The Gibson J45 still hangs on his wall, its scratches and dents now joined by proudly displayed platinum records. But more importantly, it remains a symbol of something powerful. The truth that within every person lies a song waiting to be heard, a light waiting to shine, if only we have the courage to let it. And somewhere in Manhattan, in a prestigious restaurant called Evergreen, a plaque hangs near the fireplace. It bears a simple inscription. On this spot, music reminded us that true worth isn't measured by wealth or status, but by the courage to share your gift with the world. When you find yourself facing your own Victoria Sterling moment, remember Marcus Chun and his guitar. Remember that sometimes the greatest victories come not from proving others wrong, but from proving yourself right. And most importantly, remember that your song, whatever it may be, deserves to be heard. After all, in this vast symphony we call life, every voice matters, every dream counts, and sometimes the most powerful melodies come from the most unexpected places.